Hello, friends. My name is Tina from Quantum Healing with Tina and Karen. And today I wanted to come on and just read an excerpt from a book called The Unquiet Dead by Edith Fiore. A psychologist treats spirit possession. Is this a book? Now, in this case, Dr. Fiore is helping her client to release earthbound spirits. Earthbound spirits are spirits of humans that have died, that have not crossed over into the spirit world, but they remain earthbound and they can and do attach to living humans because they don't know what else to do. Sometimes they're afraid of moving on into the light. Or they have unfinished business here, or they're carrying dense emotions that don't really allow them to move on. But I thought this was an interesting case because there are multiple, and it's not as cut and dry as some of these cases can be. And I feel like Dr. Fiore really writes about this in a way that gives insight to the symptoms that these entities can cause, and often starting from birth, which is something we see very often with clients is that, by the time you're experiencing symptoms and your life is kind of going downhill, you will often have multiple spirit attachments that are kind of vying for control of the body. And this can cause intrusive thoughts, feeling like you are two different personalities or even more than that, and not understanding why you're drawn to certain things that you wouldn't normally be drawn to. So let's go through this case and I'll add my commentary. Okay, so this is case number 9 in the book, Peter. And Dr. Fiore says, this is one of the most fascinating of all of my cases of possession, perhaps because it did not lend itself to a quick and easy resolution. As a result, the case fully demonstrates the intriguing interplay of the possessing spirit's personalities and problems with those of the possessed patients. In addition, the case of Peter is particularly interesting because of the sheer number, persistence, and variety of spirits that found temporary lodging with him. I first met Peter when he came to my office early in the fall of 1983, having been referred by a friend who knew of my work. He was hoping for some psychological counseling, with the possibility of exploring a past life, as a means of tackling his many personal problems. Peter was a tall, muscular 35-year-old with a mustache, jet black hair, and dark eyes. He immediately struck me as a person suffering from dejection, fear, and guilt. He had the air of a trapped animal as his eyes studiously avoided mine and shifted quickly about the office. As I heard the details of his life during our first few sessions, it became clear that every area was in chaos. A computer analyst, Peter had moved quickly up the ladder into a staff position to a vice president. Despite his accelerating success, his emotional and personality problems were undermining his self-confidence and threatening his career. He described himself as a bundle of nerves, quote unquote. He was especially anxious and scared in groups. This was a problem for him because he was required to give regular briefings to top executives of his own and to other companies. He spoke of frequently having severe anxiety attacks before meetings, and once, in a blind panic, actually running out of a room full of executives. He described several other anxiety attacks he's had suffered while driving in rush hour traffic in San Francisco, during which he actually had to pull to the side of the road for fear of passing out. These attacks manifested full range of physical symptoms from palpitations and sweats to nausea and dizziness. So oftentimes what we think is anxiety is actually the possessing spirit presenting those or causing those symptoms in the body. It's an actual spiritual attack. Peter spoke of many times when he had juggled his schedule to avoid the dreaded briefings, all the while knowing that he was depriving himself of opportunities for advancement, as well as failing in his responsibilities to his employers. At other times, however, he functioned brilliantly in important meetings, speaking and behaving with complete self-confidence and aplomb. When I asked him to explain why he was so erratic, he was at a total loss. That's the other thing with spirit attachments, too, is that there's really no reason behind it. Like for Peter, he could function quite well in that environment one day, and then the next he would be in a total panic and anxiety ridden, and there's really no reason behind it. Another problem bothered him even more deeply. He had a growing inability to concentrate and remember details, and claimed his memory was reduced by 50%. He frequently lost his train of thought in conversations and couldn't keep his mind on work or reading for more than 5 minutes at a time. To make matters worse, on many evenings, he was unable to recall whole segments of his day. Hours at a time would be a complete blank. He could account for them only by referring back to the daily records or by asking his workmates what they had done. So that's another common symptom is memory loss, because it's like the core spirit gets pushed to the back and these other entities come into the forefront. So it's like we could say push to the back or dissociate, so that core spirit dissociates from the body and those other entities come to the forefront. And that causes memory loss because you're not fully anchored in the body. Okay. Because of increasing fears of failure, Peter had begun to procrastinate in his work, and he was convinced that if he kept going on as he was, he would end up insane. To add to his dilemma, he was also chronically incapable of getting along with women. He was on his third marriage, which was failing rapidly. He was no longer sexually attracted to his wife, Betty, although he claimed she was physically beautiful. He was terrified that perhaps he was a repressed homosexual. At the time, he was fanatically jealous of Betty and resented the interest that men took in her when they were at parties. He often accused her of flirting, and this sometimes led to nasty near physical confrontations. Afterward, he felt guilty and full of remorse. This is another aspect of spirit attachments, is that they can and do cause changes in sexual orientation. So that's really interesting, right? When we think about what's going on in the world right now with the identity issues that people are having and gender issues that people are having, and are they really being caused by entities or possessing spirits? That's a good question. As Peter became more comfortable with me, he admitted that he was worried about his drinking. Heavy drinking had been a major part of his life for years. He drank almost every day and viewed drinking as one real relief he had from his fears and anxiety. This is often very common in people who are hosting a lot of entities, is that drinking or drug use is the only relief they can get from the panic, from the anxiety, or from the intrusive thoughts. Oftentimes, sleep is an issue too. So they will use drugs or alcohol to help just suppress the nervous system. Because when when the body is full of entities, the nervous system is overwhelmed all the time. So the drinking and drugs help to bring that down and suppress the nervous system. Okay, though brought up in an upper middle class family with a banker for a father, Peter had always preferred drinking amongst working men in the rougher sorts of establishments. When drinking, his ordinarily, excuse me, his ordinarily pleasant disposition turned sour. He would become extremely sarcastic and frequently started barroom brawls. Because of what I've learned about the relationship between drinking and the entry of spirits, my suspicions were growing stronger about the possibility of possession as the cause of his problems. So we know that drinking opens the aura to allow attachments to come in. Also, I had carefully noted the odd duality that ran through most of the problem experiences of his life. He loved his wife, yet he was not attracted to her and treated her badly. He was compassionate and loving, yet he had a terrible temper and occasionally took out his wrath on innocent pets, playmates, friends, and lovers. He was highly competent in his work, yet he felt dull-witted and unworthy. In addition to these suggestive personality traits and symptoms, Peter had had several distinct experiences that seemed to be strong clues supporting the hypothesis of possession. I've found that highly sensitive people are particularly prone to possession, and as a child, he had had several psychic experiences. In the first grade, he foresaw a dog attack that actually took place a few days later. Years later, he had a premonition of the suicide of a favorite aunt. That's also something that we see. Our clients are all highly sensitive people, and they especially were as children. So, like I mentioned, this process starts in early childhood because the children are more open to allow these entities in to attach. And with the higher level entities, there will be like a grooming process that occurs. So, yeah. Um, okay. So Peter admitted feeling ruled frequently by two different personalities, one benign and one malevolent. From childhood, he had recurrent nightmares of a wizened, evil man glaring at him. So that's common too, as the childhood nightmares, seeing evil men or other entities in dreams. But usually they're there for a reason. There's something going on there that needs to be addressed. He recalled that throughout his life in sports, every time he had an opportunity to make a major success, he would hurt himself. He badly injured a knee while trying out for the college varsity football team, and in high school, injured shoulder ligaments that had kept him from the state wrestling championship. So, these kinds of injuries are interesting too. And we'll see later that it can be actually related to the entity that is attached to you. If they were older when they died, like the frailty of their body can actually be affecting the hosted person in the here and now. So these injuries that Peter was experiencing were related to an older gentleman that was attached to him. And they can also create these injuries on purpose if the host is doing something that this entity doesn't want to do. If that entity doesn't, want to play sports, then they're going to cause an injury so that that doesn't happen. Like, this is how much control they can have over you. Okay. So frequently, when he was speaking with someone, he would get the feeling that another being was speaking through him. It even felt sometimes that he wasn't really occupying his body at all, but as though he'd step back and to the left from my head about 1 foot. So, right. So that's what I was talking about, like dissociating, like leaving the body, being pushed to the back and out while the other entities are in the forefront. So that feeling, she says, that feeling immediately reminded me of similar comments by other patients who had indeed turned out to have been possessed. During our third session, I suggested that we use hypnosis to check for possessing entities. Peter seemed alarmed at the prospect, despite my careful explanations of the concept of possession and how important a depossession could be. Hesitantly, he agreed to try. So he proved to be an extremely good hypnotic subject. He went into hypnosis quickly and easily and accepted my finger signal communication system. I checked by finger signals immediately, indicated that he did have a number of spirits with him, 6 or more. And when I asked if any of them had been with him since childhood, the yes finger lifted. So this is a technique that can be used where you're kind of bypassing the mind and just going directly into the body and subconscious when you ask the body to show you how many spirits are here, and then just using the fingers to show that number. I did a simple depossession, after which his finger signals conveyed that at least 3 entities still remained. I then asked him to let me speak with the remaining entities and took my usual approach. Why are you imposing yourself upon this man's life, causing him problems, when you know that you have gone through the change called death and should be progressing in your own spirit lives? I asked. 2 different replies came, quite distinct in tone. One was something I had heard many times before from possessing entities. I'm frightened, a trembling voice whispered. I don't know what will happen to me. I don't want to go. But the other reply surprised me with its brief but harsh sarcasm. So what? Suddenly, I was very much aware that Peter and I had our work cut out for us. So these different voices are speaking through him. I paused for a moment and then went through my standard depossession procedure again, explaining in detail the nature of spiritual experience, the learning and healing that would take place in the spirit realm, and then invoking close spirit friends or relatives to help us. Before bringing Peter out of the trance, I did a quick finger signal check for entities. It proved negative. According to his subconscious mind, there were no more spirits in his aura or body. Once out of trance, he said that he felt relaxed and refreshed. He commented that he had the distinct feeling that one of the entities had been very strong. He left feeling extremely optimistic. At the beginning of our next session, a week later, Peter reported feeling much better. He was still suffering from anxiety, but less acutely, and his relationship with his wife seemed to have improved somewhat. He appeared disappointed when I suggested that we do another check for spirits. I explained that often entities would only appear to leave on the first try, and that sometimes others came out of hiding only gradually. That's true. He quickly entered a trance, and as I had expected, finger signals indicated there were indeed more with him. This time I quickly established contact with one who gave his name clearly as Joseph Biddle and knew exactly why he was with Peter. I hate him and I'm going to make him pay for what he's done to me. You're hurting yourself as well, I countered. I don't care. It's worth it as long as I can make him pay. I asked Joseph to go back to the time of his death. He told of being alone in a Kansas hospital. He was angry when he died. Apparently, he had married a younger woman who had borne him a child. but she had run away with the baby. He had carried the pain of that experience through the rest of his life and felt particularly bitter towards babies. So interesting there. I asked Joseph to move to the time his spirit left his body. He told of seeing his wasted corpse lying in the bed, staying near it for some time, then moving through the hospital corridors. This is exactly why you have to protect yourself when going into a hospital setting. There are lost souls all over those places. Like they're just everywhere. Um, it's really a sad state of affairs that we live in, that our spiritual amnesia is so strong that number one, we don't prepare for death. No one teaches us how or what to do when we leave the body. We just, I don't know what we expect, but I guess with all the like NDE propaganda that is being pumped out right now, you just think that angels are going to come and whisk you away. But we see here how dying with the energy, the emotion of anger and hatred in your system can keep you stuck. And that's why we talk so much about purification and clearing the dense emotions that we've built up over lifetimes and are still carrying in our systems, because these keep us low, they keep us down, they keep us from exiting and flying through and out of this place to the higher dimensions. Yeah, so hatred and anger. Joseph hates babies because of what happened to him. He obviously hasn't healed from that life. And this is how when we release spirits, we take them back to, because sometimes they forget like what happened to them and where they are. Sometimes they don't even know that they're dead. So we take them back to remember their lifetime and remember their death. So taking them to the last day of their lifetime and kind of seeing what they did. And we see here that Joseph he saw his body, he stayed near it, and then just started walking around the hospital. So Joseph says, I see a tiny baby, a newborn, and I think perhaps it's my baby. And I know that I can make the baby pay for leaving me. I join the baby, and I have been with him ever since. So he attached to this little newborn baby. And it's something that we see often. We even see entities attaching to the fetus in the womb sometimes. So, with that said, you grow up with this attached entity and you don't even know the difference between your true energy and the energy of this other being who's been attached to you your whole lifetime. If you never look and do a spirit release work, then you could be hosting an entity thinking it's your own personality when it's not at all. And that's kind of the fascinating and scary part about this. Not that any of this is scary, because you'll see how she walks them through the depossession. And it's not scary at all. But it is a really important work. And I'm glad that more people are doing it now. Okay. So he attaches to the baby and he's been with them since then. So 35 years he's been with this person. I knew immediately that this was a very important entity in Peter's life and could possibly explain his periodic rages and cruelty. Like she was saying, that he would take it out on playmates, on pets, on other people. He would feel this hatred and rage that wasn't really his own, but was coming from Joseph. I patiently explained to Joseph the jeopardy of his spiritual situation, how he was simply extending his own misery as well as inflicting misery upon a living human being who had nothing to do with his problems. I called upon friendly spirits to help guide him. Soon Joseph saw his sister and departed with her. I'm not going to get into all the helpers and friends and guides and like all of that stuff in this video. We're just going to take it for face value and know that moving on into the spirit world is better than being stuck here attached to another living human and living out your hatred and anger in perpetuity, plus affecting another living human and passing that energy on to them. So before bringing Peter out of hypnosis, I was able to make contact with one more spirit. Unlike Joseph Biddle, this one was unclear about who he had been or what he was doing with Peter. In fact, he was befuddled, almost in a stupor. Come on, let's have a drink, the entity kept repeating jovially. Let's go down to Rockies and have some fun. I was able to learn that he had been a heavy equipment operator in his past life, with an obvious fondness for the bottle. He had apparently been with Peter since his early childhood. The last thing he was able to remember of his life was using a Caterpillar tractor on a construction site. It took a little urging for him to depart. When Peter was out of hypnosis, we discussed the latest findings. He felt strongly that Joseph had exerted a major influence upon his life. He recalled his early dream images of a hostile old man. He was less sure about the Caterpillar operator. We agreed that perhaps that entity could explain his drinking and his fascination with the rough working class style. He left that session feeling hopeful and enthusiastic. So we see how these entities are influencing preferences and desires. However, in our next session, the Caterpillar operator surfaced immediately when Peter went into trance. You're still here. What's your name? I asked. Lou, I think. But why are you still here with Peter? He lets me drink. He can be fun. And I get him to go to my kind of places. What kind of places? You know, a place that's got real men in it who know how to drink, not a bunch of stuffed shirts. You've been with Peter a long time, haven't you? Yes, I guess so. But you know you must leave, don't you? Why? I explained the situation to him since he was obviously confused and thought he was still alive in his own body. Again, I brought him to the moment of his death in his last life. He described an accident in which the caterpillar rolled onto him. You were killed in that accident. I was? What happened after that? I saw a small boy playing in the backyard. He seemed pleasant enough and friendly, and I felt lonely and lost. So I went toward him. Hold on one sec. It finally became clear to Lou what had really happened. He said he was sorry for the harm he had done to Peter and asked how he could move on. I told him to look around to see if there was anyone he knew. He saw his wife, who he thought had died, hating him for his drinking. Realizing she had forgiven him, he had happily left with her. This time I had the feeling that he was gone for good. I felt hopeful that we may have gotten to the root of Peter's problems, and I told him so. He smiled weakly. I hope so too, he said. But something funny happened when I was coming out of trance this time. Something inside of me, some part of me, seemed to laugh. I couldn't tell if it was just my imagination or what. We often hear that from clients. I don't know if that was just my imagination or what, but usually it's not. It usually is something coming through. But it seemed to say, I've fooled you again. You still haven't found out I'm here. Peter left wondering whether he was ever going to get any help from this approach. As he left, I found myself wondering if he would stick with the treatment long enough to reach the cure that was possible. At our next session, he smiled as he told me how much better he had felt that week. especially because he had virtually no desire to drink. Frowning, he said that his lack of sexual desire for his wife was putting a real strain on his marriage. I promptly suggested hypnosis, and after so much practice, Peter quickly went into a deep trance. At first, when I asked if there were spirits present, his finger signals indicated no. But when I asked if any were hiding, I got a yes. May I speak to you? I asked. She's not ready to speak to you. She's afraid, said Peter in a drowsy monotone. Tell me about her then. She's blonde, pretty, but shy and quiet. She's very lonely. She doesn't know why she is so unhappy. She thought she would like it with me, but she doesn't like having sex with my wife. She hates that. Do you know how long she's been with you? I don't think so. Well, perhaps she'll talk to me. Peter was silent and I waited. After a minute, I asked, is the female who is with Peter willing to speak now? Yes, I'm here, came Peter's voice, yet softer, more hesitant, almost feminine. What's your name? Lari, but why am I here? That's what we are going to try to find out, Lari. With gentle questioning, I was able to discover that this entity had met Peter at a party 5 years earlier, not long before he met his current wife. She had been attracted immediately to him because of his dominant, aggressive nature. She remembered seeing him enter the party with a girl on each arm. Later, she forced herself to walk up to him and introduce herself, and they spent half an hour talking. She died in a car wreck on the way home from that party. I carefully explained to her that by staying with Peter, she was greatly retarding her own progress and doing him immense harm. She said, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. So you must go. It will be far better for both of you. But I can't go. Where would I go? It's lonely. I was about to do some more persuading when Peter said, she won't go. She doesn't want to hear what you have to say. She won't listen to you anymore. I tried to communicate with her for several more minutes, but to no avail. When he was out of hypnosis, Peter remembered having met Lari. He was amazed that such a brief encounter could have led to her possessing him. But he recalled that soon after meeting Lari, his feelings for women had undergone a gradual and subtle change. So, oftentimes when humans die from a tragic experience, like we see here, Lari with the car accident and Lou with the caterpillar tractor falling onto him, they're kind of in shock and they don't know what to do. So this one speaks to the importance of preparing for death. So even if it is shocking and traumatic, you'll have some idea of what do I do now. And two, it shows you just how easily you can get an attachment. This is the second story I read in this book where someone had gotten into a car wreck and attached to the last person they saw before that accident. Even though they're not there in physical time and space, they will find them through resonance. Hi, Bubba. Okay, so we were now faced with the problem of somehow enticing Lari to leave. Peter also said that as he was coming out of the trance, he had once again felt the presence of a strong, malevolent personality that was mocking us. Over the next few weeks, our sessions were not particularly noteworthy. We attempted to bring forth entities on several occasions with no success. Peter felt no underlying sense of alien presences, whether under hypnosis or in his day-to-day life. His sex life with his wife had improved. Things were going well for him at work, and he continued to have no desire for alcohol. That's all great. During these sessions, he elaborated on his inner feelings of worthlessness, guilt, and insecurity. But generally, things seemed to be going well for him, and I was beginning to believe that he was no longer harboring spirits. Perhaps they had left spontaneously on their own. Feeling his remaining problems could be helped with psychotherapy, I began to explore with him his early relationships with his father and mother. However, during each session, we continued to utilize a routine period of hypnosis with the hope of reestablishing contact with Lari and any other entities that were present. Then, in our first session in December, we unexpectedly made a breakthrough. In the early minutes of the trance, Peter's voice suddenly changed in its tone. You still don't know I'm here, do you? He gloated. I immediately recognized the same mocking voice I heard months earlier. How long have you been with Peter? I asked. Long enough to know him well, over 4 years. Why have you stayed with him for so long when you know you are only hurting him and yourself? You've had many chances to go in these past months. They would not like me. I've done some very evil things. If I went there, I would have to change. But you do have to change. You cannot stay here. Look around you. Maybe there is someone you once knew who has come to get you. Do you see the light? I've seen the light many times, and I've seen my mother near it, but I always run from it. I don't want to face her, and I'm afraid of what they would do to me. So that's interesting. They wouldn't do anything to hurt you, she says. I don't know. Realizing I would get nowhere with this approach, I nonetheless felt encouraged that I had established a dialogue with this recalcitrant entity. I asked him to go back to his last lifetime. He said he lived in San Francisco with his mother around the turn of the century. My name is David, he said. I don't remember what I did for a living, but I know that I practiced black arts and gained much power through using them. I was the leader of a group who worshiped Satan. My mother never knew this, but she would hate me forever if she did. I destroyed many lives. You can be helped with all that later in the spirit world, I said. But it is time to stop destroying lives now. Move ahead in time. Let yourself remember your death. The ground is shaking. An earthquake. Something just fell on my head, part of the building. I'm crushed by falling bricks. I see my lifeless body and I want to be back inside of it. I'm cheated out of life. Long pause. I saw the light, which I've seen many times since, and I heard voices of people coming to get me, but I was afraid and I turned my back on them. The next thing I remember, I was with a man whose job was cleaning streets. I joined him to stay alive, although it wasn't a very good choice, and it was a terrible job. This man died a natural death prematurely. After that, I joined many, many people. I found I could join them when I wanted to and leave when I wanted to. It was interesting. When I got bored or depressed, I could just leave and find some other person to join. I made most of these people miserable. I gave them some power. Some got very interested in the occult, but they all became depressed. And I didn't like to be around them for long. So, isn't that interesting? He makes these people miserable and depressed, and then he doesn't like to be around them. So he just leaves and hops on to someone else. It's also interesting to me that there's an occult influence here, influencing people to start looking into and researching the occult, which is something we've seen too with clients, that they're often being influenced by entities to look into these things and go down that path. How did you join Peter? I asked. He was drinking in a bar in San Francisco. He was with some friends, but he was withdrawn and unhappy. I could tell that he was weak and that it would be easy to join him. He had already known Satan. When Peter and I discussed what had been revealed, he suddenly bowed his head in shame and told me that as a teenager, he had been intrigued with the occult and had read several books on satanic rituals. He said that for years he had kept a small painted plaster statuette of a cloven footed and bearded Satan on his dresser. On several occasions, the figurine had bothered him emotionally, but he had been unable to bring himself to throw it away. In our next session, so here we see sympathetic resonance. Here we see an attraction point. There's an attraction, an energetic attraction point between this entity who practiced Satanism and Peter, who dabbled as a teenager. That energy is still there, it remains in the field, and it creates that point of attraction, the sympathetic resonance between two beings. So that's very interesting. This is why it's important for us to clean up our energy. So even though Peter wasn't practicing anymore, that attraction point was still there because he hadn't cleared the energy of it. In our next session, I regressed Peter to one of his past lives, and we discovered that he had indeed been an active Satan worshiper. This certainly helped to explain David's attraction to him. So there we go with the past life coming in and overlaying on current life energy. Oftentimes we see this and it adds to that attraction point and what we're attracting in. Nothing is by accident. The things that show up in our lives that we are drawn to, that we're attracted to, there's always a reason behind it, whether it's an attached entity, whether it's coming from a past life influence, whether it's coming from a contract that was made. There's always a reason why we are drawn to and attracted to certain things. And oftentimes in sessions, people will say, well, I don't know if I'm saying this because I just saw it in a movie or I just read this in a book. And what I say is that, yeah, because you're drawn to those things because they're similar in experience to what your experience was in that lifetime. So that's why you're drawn in that direction to those things. It's not by accident. Okay. Where was I? Okay. In the following session, I was able to make contact with David almost immediately. I asked him, do you want to stay in this endless cycle, feeling miserable and causing misery in others when you know there is a way to stop it? I am still afraid, he replied. I emphasized there is nothing to fear. Any change would be a change for happiness and joy. But they hate me. And all that hate and shame is on your side. It's all in you. Your mother loves you. Look around. Maybe she's here now. Yes, here she is. She wants me to go with her and she forgives me. I'm going to go. Goodbye. And with that, the tortured entity David left. Peter and I were both optimistic at the end of that session. Putting together the pieces of the puzzle, he could relate the period when David had joined him to greatly increased feelings of insecurity and self-hatred. Over the next few weeks, Peter's self-esteem continued to improve. He felt renewed confidence in himself and found that he was able to meet and work with people in his job with very little anxiety. His relationship with his wife was improving and his memory was far better. During our sessions, we continued to use hypnosis as a check for the possible presence of entities. However, the signals repeatedly showed there was none. So I used the remainder of our time to give him positive suggestions for improved self-esteem. Toward the end of January, Peter appeared for a session in a nervous and uncomfortable state. He was on the verge of an anxiety attack that had started just before he left home to drive over to see me. He got closer to my office. He suffered from mounting fear and could almost hear a voice inside of him pleading for him to turn around and go back home. This happens very often too. During the brief drive, he suddenly developed a stuffy nose as though he had a bad cold. He had to muster all of his willpower to enter my office and stay. Entities will often try to prevent someone from being released. Like they'll prevent you from that appointment, whether they cause a sickness in your body, they somehow cause a flat tire, your internet goes out, you can't pay, any number of things. Exactly. You'll feel really anxious and panicky, and you'll mistake that anxiety and panic for, oh my God, I shouldn't do this. But it's not actually yours. It's the anxiety and panic of that entity that doesn't want you to keep your appointment because it knows if you keep your appointment that it's going to go, and it's scared to death to go because you're its source of life force, and it's how it's living through you. So this kind of stuff happens all the time, and people are surprised that they can create physical symptoms, but they do. So yeah, Peter had to override all of that through his own will to get to the office. I put Peter into trance immediately, thinking that David might have regained a foothold. Signals indicated that there was indeed a male entity present and that he wanted help. But instead of David, he turned out to be a light-hearted, fun-loving spirit named Eddie Weinberg, who said he was 27 years old and had joined Peter at a Sacramento bar in 1978. At first, Eddie refused to admit that he was dead. When I asked him how he felt to be called Peter, he replied blithely, I'm a rock singer, and people can call me anything they like as long as they listen to my music and pay to hear it. He also managed to remark that he thought I was foxy and wouldn't mind a date with me. It turned out that he had been a small-time singer who had played lounges and small clubs around Sacramento. He had burned to death in a car accident in 1978, immediately prior to joining Peter, another traumatic death. He had been trapped in the car, and the last thing he remembered was inhaling thick, pungent smoke that burned his nose and throat, hence the stuffy nose that Peter had on the way. Often we will manifest the physical symptoms of how these spirits died. So if it's inhaling smoke, you might get like lung issues, stuffy nose, sinus problems. If it's a heart attack or, something sudden like that, you might get chest pain. If it's like being crushed, like Lou was by that caterpillar, oftentimes that will cause musculoskeletal type issues, or even like specific places on the body where that were crushed will cause you problems, and you won't be able to get to the root cause of why this pain is here, why this sickness is here. And it's because it's coming from this earthbound that is attached to you. That's very, very common. Okay. So, Eddie, after the wreck, he stayed nearby, staring at his dead body. But the shock of seeing paramedics cart his charred body off in the ambulance had driven him away. I felt very lonely and lost then, and headed back to the bar where I had been drinking before the wreck. But nobody would talk to me, and I couldn't even get a glance from any of the women. I felt like Casper the Friendly Ghost. So even though he saw his dead body getting taken away, he still didn't fully realize that he was actually dead. And he was still trying to talk to people, which will often happen. It's really sad. When he first saw Peter sitting at the bar, Eddie thought he looked like a real schmuck because he was so quiet and withdrawn. But he also sensed that he could easily join him. Out of loneliness, he did. I asked Eddie if he were ready to move on, and he said that he was. When I asked if he saw anyone there to escort him, he recognized Spirit Aunt Sylvia, and then he was gone. Coming out of the trance, Peter felt fine, and all traces of the incipient anxiety attack had completely dissipated. This is how you know, number one, that it's real, and number two, that they're gone. When you release an entity and all of the symptoms just dissipate like in an instant, the mind will often try to reject that and doubt what happened and be like, this is weird. I don't know. Hold on. My throat hurts. So all this like doubt comes up about did that really happen? Is that real? The other day we had someone, we were tuning in, and she started getting this pain in her throat, and it felt like it went down into her stomach. And the deeper we went into that, the heavier the pain got, and it ended up feeling like a rock in her stomach. And it was like, I am not allowed to say anything. That was the energy. I'm not allowed to say anything. So when we tuned in deeper, I could see it, but I was like waiting for her to say it. It was a snake, and it was curled up in her stomach, and it was coming up and out of her mouth. So she had started etherically pulling that snake out and breathing into that space to push it out. And she did. But so that heaviness and pain, plus she had like tingles all over her body. After she had pulled that snake out, all of it dissipated. It was all gone. And then you're like, what? Did that just really happen? And yeah, it did really happen. And that's how you know, number one, that you've cleared it and that it's actually real, because the physical feelings dissipate. You don't know if these things are there unless you do the investigation. And sometimes, and like we're seeing here with Peter, it can be layers and layers and layers and layers of investigation that you have to do. You don't always clear them all in one session. You have to keep going back in because there are entities that will hide. They don't want to be found out because they're scared, or they don't know what else to do, or they're lonely, like in Lari's case, and they're just, they're just kind of clinging on for dear life because they don't know what else to do. And then you have the ones that know exactly what they're doing, like the Satanist who was just making people miserable because that's what he did. And then just moving on to the next person when he had destroyed that person's life enough. Um, so yeah, so let's move on, and I'll finish this. Okay. So Peter's anxiety attack completely goes after releasing that entity. Completely dissipated. The stuffiness in his nose was gone. So he recalled that he had undergone a minor personality change in 1978, suddenly taking an interest in bands and live singing that he had never had before. So these sudden interests are also signs of a spirit attachment. He also became quite the ladies' man and developed a newfound talent for picking out women and getting them to bed quickly. So just like this, a rock star, like low-key rock star Eddie Weinberg, he was influencing Peter to do these things because he's living out life through him. It's crazy, but it's real. So I'm reading this to you guys so you can really get a sense of the signs and symptoms of spirit attachments and how really deeply they can affect us. And these are just earthbound spirits. These aren't even like the dark force entities or the aliens. These are just human souls. Okay. So Peter became the ladies' man, picking up women, getting them to bed with him. 1978. 4 days later, at our next session, Peter reported that things were going fine for him professionally and that his self-confidence was high. Yet his sexual problems with his wife had suddenly resurfaced with a vengeance. He found that he had absolutely no sexual desire for her. In fact, he was repelled by the thought of making love with her. Whenever she touched him, he got upset. And she had complained that even in his sleep, he would push her away. This is why we talk all the time about knowing yourself, know thyself. Like that is everything because you have to know what energy is yours and what isn't. When you feel like suddenly repelled by someone that you love, you know that there's something else influencing you. There's something else going on there. So it's good that Peter was in this process and understanding that there was something supernatural happening here. So once in hypnosis, his signals showed there was a female entity. It turned out to be Lari, the girl who had died in the car wreck. Why are you still with Peter? I feel trapped and I'm afraid. I don't know where to go. It's so lonely here now because everybody's gone. So they do like live in a cluster. They all live together. Everybody's gone, but I can't stand his having sex with Betty. Are you ready to leave now? Yes. Look around. Do you see anyone here for you? There is someone here. There's an old woman, a friend of my mother's. She delivered babies. A midwife? Yeah. What does she say to you? She says, "Come on, girl, it's time to go now. Stop being so sad. It's time to start a new day." And I'm going with her now. Since Peter's signals indicated that there were no more spirits, I brought him out of trance. He remarked that he had experienced Lari's immense joy at finally leaving. He added that she had felt abandoned by all the spirits who had left. She was the lonely one, right? They were the only company she had known. Peter felt greatly relieved, as though a great weight had been lifted from him. He was convinced that he was finally free, but by now I had learned to take a let's wait and see attitude with him. For several sessions following Lari's departure, Peter reported that his sexual relationship with Betty had continued to improve. His self-confidence and work performance remained strong, and his drinking problem had vanished. Look at that. A drinking problem vanishing just by releasing a spirit. And it was time for us to terminate treatment. His goals had been accomplished. Amazing. So in the initial case of Peter, like he could be labeled, mentally ill or even as a narcissist with his or bipolar with those swinging personality shifts or even multiple personality DID. Any one of those diagnoses would probably fit somehow. And really all it was these attached earthbound spirits. and how much influence they were having on him, on his work, on his sex life, on his drinking habits, addiction, um, on his personality, and how he would take things out on other people and experience that rage that like comes out of nowhere. Sometimes that is coming from an entity that is attached. Um, yeah, so we cross over earthbound souls a little bit differently. We have them find their spark of light in their heart, their divine spark of light. We have them use that spark to spread it throughout their entire being. And as that spark spreads through their system, it's going to clear away all that like old trauma and dense energy that they're carrying still. So we take them through a healing process. And then we remind them that they are creator beings, that they can create any reality that they wish to create. And we encourage them to do that, to move on, to open that portal into that reality, and then to pass through. And oftentimes they are sorry for the pain that they've caused. They ask for forgiveness sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And yeah, most of them don't realize the damage that they're doing. I mean, you see that some do, like the Satanist guy knew exactly what he was doing. And this is just such an interesting case because we see how it's a process. And I was just talking about this in our community about how, spiritual hygiene, like what are some tips and advice for spiritual hygiene? And really it's a process more than it is like, okay, like do these 5 steps and that's it. It's really a process of kind of like digging through the layers and seeing where these symptoms are coming from. And that's why we're working with people on a more long-term basis now through our empowerment process so that we can kind of work in this way where we're taking you through the layers and teaching you how to do this process yourself so that you don't need anyone to clear you or maintain your energy field, but that you know and understand how to cross over an earthbound spirit, how to clear yourself of a dark force entity, how to make those past life connections and clear and seal up the access points. Because what we see here is that they're access points. Where did these entities attach to Peter? A few of them attached at the bar, right? One of them attached through his satanic connections from a past life of practicing the dark arts and then dabbling in this life now. There's always a reason why these entities are attached. Usually there's a weakening in the system somewhere or a vibrational match that needs to be seen, healed, and then sealed up so that they can't access you through that point of vulnerability. That's what we call a point of vulnerability. And it's also why the purification process is so important, especially before death. It's really the purification process is about preparing for death. It's about releasing all the density so that we're not carrying any hatred or anger, um, or guilt, shame. Shame's a really, really big one and a really low vibrational emotion that, if you slip into those astral realms where you have a life review, the shame will be initiated. They will try to get you with the shame. So, yeah, it's just really about like clearing and sifting through all of this stuff, releasing any attachments too, because they can weigh you down. If you leave the body with attachments, they're going to want to come with you. they're not going to stay with the physical body. They're going to want to come with you because they don't know what else to do. And so either they're going to keep you earthbound, because often what we'll see is there's like clusters of them, like a nest almost. And they're all like nested together in your field. And they're going to weigh you down and not let you, go home or wherever that is, because the weight of the density that they're carrying is going to weigh you down. This is why spirit release is so important for us anyway, in helping others to learn how to become free from this. And I'm really so grateful for, the pioneers in this field, like Dr. Edith Fiore and Terrence Palmer, who was our teacher, because, this stuff is still taboo. Nobody really talks about this. The normal everyday person has no idea that this is even a thing. Like, I know you guys do because you watch this channel, but someone reminded me yesterday that, people don't know these things. I'm like, you know what? You're right. So let's start at the basics in understanding what is a spirit attachment and why is it important to address them and release them, because they can have real physical, energetic, and spiritual effects on a living human and a deceased human. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, I would love to hear from you in the comments. As far as how to protect yourself from the lost souls wandering around, if you're a really sensitive soul and you tend to be more heart-based and open, a lot of times just your light alone will act as a beacon and you will draw a lot of them to you, which is often the case for me. I have to clear earth. I used to, it's not as much anymore, but I used to have to clear earthbounds from me all the time because they would just come in and attach to my field. We went to a haunted house once on a tour in Cape May, and you could definitely feel the energies in that house. And I left there feeling really sick, nauseous, just not myself. I started to have pain in my body. And when I tuned in, they were earthbounds that had attached to me from walking through that haunted house. And they actually wanted help, which was good because they were easy to release. And, this doesn't have to be a big process that you go to someone for. You can do it yourself. You just have to have the conversation with them, let them know that it's not appropriate to be attached to you, that it's draining you, it's causing you problems. And, depending on how feisty they are, they might fight with you or they might not. But generally you can convince them pretty quickly that it's time to move on. But these ones that had attached to me, they wanted to go. So that was an easy transition. Well, what was really interesting about this was it that day? It was on that trip. We went to Cape May and we had gone to the lighthouse that day. No, it wasn't that day. It was another day. But we went to the lighthouse anyway and toured the lighthouse. And when we had come down the steps and out to the back, there was like a little garden type space with a bench and some flowers. And I look over and I see a dead bunny laying behind the bench. Like someone had placed it there. It wasn't a natural event. Someone had placed this bunny there. When I went over to look, the neck was cut. And I just felt so terrible. And there were like kids like running around and stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. So we went in to tell the lady and she took care of it. But it looked like some kind of ritual sacrifice. Well, when I was releasing those human earthbounds, I found the bunny also attached to me. So I had to release the bunny too. So animal spirits can get attached to us too, which I had never seen before that. And I think because of the way it was killed, maybe in that sacrifice or whatever ritual they had done. Yeah. So I think that's why we saw it, so that it would have the chance to, or why it attached to me, so it would have the chance to be helped and cross over. But yeah, these things are real, and we're not taught. No one teaches us any of this. So this is why I'm just like doing this video. And I thank Jessa for kind of giving me the inspiration to walk through this case study, so that we have tons and tons of case studies, but I haven't written them out. So it was just easier to read through this one and kind of point out the different um, signs and symptoms and attraction points, so that you guys could have a deeper understanding of how all this works. So, and how to protect yourself, you know, energetically shield yourself daily. If you find dark force entities, yeah, sweep them into the holy fire. That's a great suggestion. But your daily protection, putting on your armor, your energetic bubble around you, you know, really blasting that light out from your heart and creating that protection around you, that boundary between you and the rest of the world, so that you're not just, you know, taking on entities or earthbounds or energies from other people. Those are the simplest things you can do. And then, of course, drugs, you know, alcohol, that kind of stuff is going to open up your field and allow these things in, like we saw with the case of Peter. So it's really about like purifying, living a simple life, doing exploration to even look to see, do I have attachments? Because we pretty much all do. Pretty much everybody has attachments, like we see in these cases, and they don't know or understand how they're being influenced mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And that's why, like, the first defense for any kind of illness is spirit release. And Dr. Palmer talked about that all the time. So, yeah, this is an ode to him. So, if you guys have any insights, any comments, any questions, just leave them down below. I always love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.